Some houses are alive. They swallow time, engrave pain into their walls, and stand as silent witnesses, feeding on the breath of those who step inside. I stood in the overgrown yard, staring up at the old house I was about to renovate. It loomed under the gray sky, its brickwork cracked and weathered, tangled in the grip of dead vines. The Victorian architecture still bore traces of its former grandeur, ornate carvings and intricate woodwork, but now it was nothing more than a decaying relic. The windows, hollow and dark, watched me in silence. The front door groaned as it swung open. I stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of mold and decay, like something had been festering here for decades. Dust coated every surface, stirring in faint clouds with each step. The hallway was dim, the once polished oil lamp holders buried under layers of grime. The wallpaper had peeled away in jagged strips, revealing the cracked wooden panels beneath. Even the silence carried a damp, whispering presence. I moved toward the staircase. The wooden steps creaked under my weight, as if something beneath them was stirring from its slumber. Upstairs, the rooms lay abandoned, the old furniture draped in white sheets, like forgotten corpses sleeping in the depths of time. But it was the attic door at the end of the hallway that held my attention. It looked newer than the rest of the house, as if someone had reinforced it long after the house had begun to decay. I turned the handle. Locked. Curiosity gnawed at me. I found a tool, pried at the lock. The door gave way with a heavy, reluctant thud. A wave of foul air rushed past me, thick with damp rot, the unmistakable stench of something long forgotten. The attic was narrow. Dust hung in the air, drifting like ghostly specks in the dim light of my flashlight. Then I saw it. A rusted iron bed stood in the corner. The bed frame was still bound in chains, corroded with age, yet unmistakably strong. The walls surrounding it were covered in scratches, dozens, hundreds, deep, jagged gouges, as if someone had clawed at them desperately, trying to escape. The air turned frigid. A sharp chill crawled up my spine. I reached out, brushing my fingers over the markings. The surface was rough, uneven. If I pressed hard enough, I could almost feel the broken nails that had dug into the wood, the silent scream buried beneath each scratch. I jerked my hand away. Then, I heard it. A breath. Faint. Ragged. Coming from the ceiling above me. I held my breath. Listened. It came in broken intervals, a soft, shuddering inhale, then another. A whisper of someone trapped in the dark, gasping, sobbing. I spun around, my flashlight trembling in my grip, sweeping over the room. But there was nothing. Nothing but that rusted bed, standing alone in the corner. Waiting. Night fell. I shut the attic door, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me. Lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, my pulse loud in the silence. Then, at the stroke of midnight, the breathing returned. A whisper from above. A forgotten echo, murmuring in the cracks of time. By early morning, I could barely contain my urgency. I headed straight for the local archives, determined to uncover the history of the house. I told myself it was just a professional habit. I always liked to research a building's past before beginning renovations. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was looking for an explanation. Something that could make me believe last night's horrors were nothing more than tricks of my imagination. The scent of aged paper hung heavy in the air as the archivists sifted through dust-covered records. Finally, they unearthed an old file detailing the house's history. It once belonged to a wealthy merchant from the late 19th century, Henry Vandenberg. In his time, Vandenberg was a man of great renown. His wealth made him a towering figure in high society, his name appearing frequently in the newspapers. But when it came to his wife, Eleanor Vandenberg, there was barely a mention. I combed through the brittle pages of old newspapers until I found a brief entry. Eleanor had been declared mentally unstable and had not been seen in public for years. Rumors swirled that she had passed away. But there was no official death record. No funeral. My fingers hovered over the faded ink, my pulse quickening. If she never died, then what happened to her? Digging further, I stumbled upon a more detailed account, a handwritten note, its script uneven and hurried, as though scrawled by a servant or a concerned neighbor.
After the lady vanished, the house never felt the same. But at night, people could still hear her crying. The attic was sealed shut, yet sometimes whispers could be heard from inside. She's still there.
A chill curled around my spine. I snapped the folder shut, my palms damp with cold sweat. The implications were clear. Eleanor had never left. She had been locked away in the attic. Left there until she wasted away. And her body had never been found. My mind reeled back to the attic. The rusted iron bed. The deep scratches in the wood. Were those marks the desperate struggle of a dying woman? Or something far worse, proof that she was still trying to escape? I barely remembered how I made it back to the house. Night had already fallen by the time I curled up in bed, willing myself to sleep. But no matter how hard I tried, those words echoed in my head.
She's still there.
Time passed sluggishly. Midnight struck, the distant chime of a clock reverberating through the silence. The house held its breath. Not even the wind dared to move. And then, just as my eyelids grew heavy, a whisper slithered through the stillness. Low. Hoarse. As brittle as wind through dead vines.
He lied to me. I want to go home.
My blood turned to ice. I stared at the ceiling, every muscle locked in place as a cold, suffocating dread pressed down on me. The air had turned glacial. I could feel it. Something was standing outside the attic door. Watching me. Waiting. I started dreaming of her. Every night, as darkness fell, my mind was pulled into the same nightmare. I stood in the attic. Silence pressed in from all sides, thick and suffocating. The air reeked of decay, rust, damp rot, and something deeper, something foul that clung to my lungs with every breath. The rusted iron bed stood exactly where it had always been, chains hanging limply from its frame, waiting. And then, she appeared. A figure lingering in the farthest corner of the room. She wore a tattered white nightgown, clinging to her emaciated frame like a second skin. Her golden hair hung in tangled strands, half concealing her face. But her eyes were empty. No pupils. No light. Just hollow, lifeless sockets staring straight at me. Her lips parted, forming silent words. I strained to hear, but my ears were filled with nothing but a dull, droning hum. I tried to move. To run. But my body refused to obey. She stepped closer, her feet gliding soundlessly across the floor as if she were floating. She raised one hand, thin, deathly pale, her nails cracked and blackened. Her fingers reached for my wrist. I woke up gasping, heart hammering against my ribs, drenched in cold sweat. The room was still, the only movement coming from the curtains shifting with the wind outside. But then I looked down, and my blood ran cold. A red mark encircled my wrist. It was faint, but unmistakable, a deep, thin indentation, as if something had coiled around my skin and pulled tight. I touched it. The skin stung, raw and sensitive. This wasn't just a dream. Dreams don't leave marks. This was something else. A warning. The nightmares only grew worse after that. Each night, she stood closer. Each night, she tried to touch me. And in reality, more marks began appearing on my wrists, my ankles, even around my throat. As if, inch by inch, she was dragging me into her world. I was unraveling. Sleep-starved, haunted, my mind fraying at the edges. And at midnight, I began to hear it. The attic door. A faint creak in the silence, as if something was moving inside. Footsteps, light, deliberate, pacing just above my bedroom ceiling. I curled up in bed, pressing my hands over my ears, whispering to myself that it was just the house settling. Just the groaning of old wood. But then came the night when I opened my eyes. And the bedroom door was wide open. The hallway stretched before me, bathed in the pale slant of moonlight. The air was ice cold. And I knew something was standing in the doorway, watching me. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Then, ever so slowly, the shadow in the dark began to move. It was coming for me. I finally understood Eleanor's ghost wasn't just trapped in the attic. She was looking for a replacement. Someone to take her place. And I was her chosen target. I couldn't stay here. I had to leave. The night was heavy, draping the house in an oppressive darkness. I grabbed my suitcase and made my way to the front door. My fingers brushed against the doorknob, ready to turn it. Then, behind me, a sigh. Soft. Deliberate. The walls began to shift. The rotting wood groaned, seeping black, tar-like liquid. The air thickened with the rancid stench of mold and decay. Above me, the attic door creaked open. From its depths came the unmistakable sound of chains dragging across the floor. I tried to move, to resist, but my body no longer belonged to me. An unseen force pulled at my legs, guiding me toward the stairs. My mind blurred. I could see her face now, Eleanor, smiling gently, her hand reaching out for mine. I was steps away from the attic. 1 step. 2. At the last possible moment, I bit down hard on my tongue, the sharp burst of pain yanking me back to reality. I wrenched myself free from the invisible grip and stumbled back. My breath came in ragged gasps as I bolted toward the living room, snatching up a can of gasoline and my lighter. Without hesitation, I doused the staircase and the attic door, my hand shaking as I flicked the lighter's flame to life. The fire spread in an instant. Flames licked up the walls, devouring the rotten wood. Eleanor's screams rose through the house, shrill and agonized, drowning in the roar of the inferno. I barely made it out, collapsing onto the cold grass as the house burned behind me. By the time the firefighters and police arrived, the house was nothing but smoldering ruins. They found no body in the wreckage. No remains of an attic. As if it had never existed. I was taken to the hospital, diagnosed with mild smoke inhalation but otherwise unharmed. But when I woke up, my wrists still ached. The red marks were still there. Faint, but real. Weeks passed. I left the city, desperate to leave everything behind. But at night, in the silence of my new apartment, I could still hear it. A faint, shallow breath. A presence lurking just beyond the dark. Then, one morning, I stepped into the bathroom and saw something carved into the mirror. A message scratched deep into the glass.
You think you got away?